The woman says her name is Emily Hart, and she comes from a quiet little town in Vermont, where winters are white and summers are soft with the smell of pine and lilac. She grew up in a family of storytellers, with a father who read poetry aloud at the dinner table, and a mother who believed the world could be healed with just the right kind of love. Emily had always believed in happy endings, in the kind that made you cry under a blanket at midnight and wake up with swollen eyes, but a warm heart. Like and subscribe if you're into emotional roller coasters, and write in the comments where you're reading from. Love stories are universal. She met Jacob 3 years ago in a bookstore in Boston, both of them reaching for the same battered copy of Norwegian Wood, their hands brushing for a second that felt too long to be nothing. He had one of those easy smiles, the kind that felt like it already knew your secrets and didn't mind them, the kind that said, "I'll stay, even when it's hard." He was studying architecture and worked part-time as a bartender, which meant his days were long and his nights were longer, but somehow he always made time for her. They built a life in pieces, dinner by dinner, laughter by laughter, argument by forgiveness, until it became a rhythm they both leaned on like breath. Their engagement wasn't dramatic, no hidden photographers or rose petals, just the two of them sitting on the floor of their apartment, eating Thai takeout, when he slipped a silver ring over her finger and whispered, "Marry me, Em." She didn't cry. She laughed big and loud and joyful, threw a spring roll at him, and said yes. 3 times in a row. They set the date for late June, when the gardens were full and the skies were blue, and her mother cried happy tears over tea when she heard. They toured venues, argued over invitation fonts, tasted cakes until they were sick. It felt like building a dream, brick by brick. And then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Jacob vanished. No call, no message, no tearful explanation. Just silence like a slap. She woke up on a Monday and his side of the bed was cold. His phone went straight to voicemail, and the apartment felt hollow in a way that echoed. Her first instinct wasn't betrayal. It was worry. Maybe he'd been hurt. Maybe he'd had an accident. Maybe something had happened. She called his friends, his job, even his mother in Maine, but no one had heard from him in days. His bank account had been drained, his social media wiped, his name like dust in a place she thought was safe. Her world crumbled piece by piece, flower orders canceled, dress returned, guests informed through choked sobs that there would be no wedding. She stopped eating for a while, not out of choice, but because nothing tasted like anything, and the only thing she could feel was the sting of being left behind. The hardest part wasn't even the silence. It was that he had taken the future with him. No explanation, no apology, no closure, just a ghost where a promise used to be. She started therapy because her mother insisted and because she could no longer sleep without waking to the sound of her own heartbreak. She kept the ring in a drawer for months, like a secret she was too ashamed to share, too proud to destroy. It took nearly a year for her to breathe without breaking. She changed her hair, moved apartments, and went back to painting. Something she hadn't done since college. She told people she was fine, and some days she even believed it. But grief has a shape, and sometimes it curls beside you in bed even when you swear you've locked the door. One day, she flew to Santorini for her best friend's bachelorette trip, a wild, sun-drenched escape meant to remind her she was still alive. The air smelled like salt and citrus, the sea like silk, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the warmth of something close to joy. They rented a villa overlooking the caldera, laughed over ouzo and feta, danced barefoot under the stars. It was supposed to be a celebration of beginnings, not ghosts. But on the 3rd day, while walking back from a cliffside cafe, she saw him. Jacob. Hand in hand with a woman in a flowing white dress, the kind they give you at honeymoon resorts, the kind that means forever. He was laughing, tanned, relaxed, and for a moment she wondered if she had dreamed the devastation he left behind. She froze, her friends stopping mid-step as the air thickened around her. He hadn't seen her yet. He was too caught up in kissing the woman's shoulder, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. She didn't move at first, just stood there like a photograph. Like if she blinked, he would disappear and time would reset, and she'd wake up in Boston with his hand on her back and the smell of coffee in the air. But he was real. Real in the most brutal, undeniable way, smiling with his whole body, tracing circles on another woman's skin, existing in a future that was supposed to be hers. Her best friend Natalie reached for her arm, whispering her name like a rope, like an anchor, like, "Come back to us, Emily, come back." If you've ever had your heart snapped clean in half on a sun-drenched island, drop a like and write in the comments what country you're reading from. Heartbreak doesn't care about borders. She didn't cry. Not right away. Her face burned, her chest twisted, but no tears came. Instead, she watched. And watched. Long enough to see Jacob press his lips to the other woman's temple. Long enough to hear him call her babe, in that same low tone he used to use when Emily couldn't sleep, and he'd wrap himself around her and hum nonsense into her neck. She turned away fast enough to make the world blur, her breath sharp and painful, and she nearly tripped over the stones on the path back to the villa. Inside the whitewashed walls of their Airbnb, she exploded. The silence shattered, and grief came roaring back with fists. She screamed into pillows, tore her sunglasses off and threw them at the wall, shouted curses she never thought she'd say aloud. Natalie held her like a shield against the storm and whispered that she didn't need to be strong anymore, that it was okay to be wrecked, to be wild with betrayal. But Emily didn't feel okay. She felt like the universe had played a cruel joke, given her a glimpse of healing only to plunge her back into the fire. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the balcony with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the lights of boats bobbing on the water. Every few minutes she'd hear laughter rise up from the Honeymoon resort down the hill. Sometimes she swore it was his. She wanted answers. She wanted to know how someone could love you in a way that made you believe, and then vanish like you were just a chapter, not the whole book. She opened her phone and scrolled, her thumb trembling, until she found it. Jacob's new Instagram. Private, of course, but the profile picture was him and her, forehead to forehead with the caption, "Found my forever." She clicked back to his mother's page. It was there too. A wedding photo from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. The date was exact. The same day Emily should have been saying "I do," he was marrying someone else. Her stomach dropped. Her hands turned ice cold. So it wasn't just that he left. He left because he was already building another life. She counted the timeline backwards, every moment reassembled like broken glass in her palms. All the nights he said he was working late, the sudden new passwords on his laptop, the distant look he'd brush off as stress. He had been preparing for this while she had been tasting cake and writing her vows. Rage found her then, so hot and alive it nearly startled her. Not just sadness now, not just grief, but a fury that stood up and shouted, "I mattered too." She didn't know the woman's name, didn't know if she had known about Emily, or if she too had been fed sweet lies. But Emily knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. She had been buried under his absence long enough. The next morning she made a decision. She put on the red dress, the one she almost didn't pack, the one that made her feel like fire. Her friends begged her not to do anything reckless, but she kissed them on the cheek and walked out the door with her head held higher than it had in months. The Honeymoon resort was buzzing with laughter and wine and fresh flowers, and she walked straight through the lobby like she belonged there. She didn't go looking for him. Not directly. Instead, she sat at the bar, ordered a drink, and waited. The universe didn't make her wait long. Within 30 minutes, she heard his laugh again, closer this time, just around the corner. And then he was there. He stepped onto the patio with his bride, hand on the small of her back, his wedding ring glinting in the sun. He didn't see her at first. He was too busy being perfect. Then his eyes flicked over to the bar, and for a second, the world stopped moving. Emily turned to face him fully, not a smile, not a single word, just her eyes, locked on his like daggers. He turned pale, just slightly, a flicker in his expression, like something cracking beneath the surface. The woman beside him noticed, and looked too, confusion on her face, her hand tightening on his. Emily didn't break eye contact. She raised her glass slowly, held it in a silent toast, and then drank. She didn't need to cause a scene. Her existence was enough. She stood, turned, and walked away without looking back. She didn't owe him closure. She didn't need his explanation to be whole again. She was the fire he thought he could smother. But she had learned to burn on her own. And that ends part 2-4. It only gets more powerful from here, so stick around for part 3-4, and don't forget to like and drop a comment with your country. Healing is its own kind of revenge. The walk back from the resort felt like reclaiming every piece of herself she didn't know he'd taken. The wind rushed against her skin like it recognized her, like it had been waiting to brush against the woman who had finally stood up from the ashes. She didn't shake. She didn't cry. She just walked with a steadiness she hadn't felt since the day she bought her wedding dress, back when everything still felt like forever. If you've ever stared heartbreak in the face and didn't blink, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments what country you're fighting through love in. This one is for the ones who didn't crumble. Back in the villa, her friends waited with worried eyes and soft hands and open arms. But Emily didn't collapse into them. She just nodded, poured herself a glass of water, and sat down like a woman who had finally laid a ghost to rest. Natalie asked what happened, gently, carefully, as if afraid the words might still crack her open. I saw him. He saw me, Emily said, and that was all. It was enough. That night, she painted. She pulled out the cheap travel set she'd brought as an afterthought and dipped her brush into blues and blood reds and oranges the color of fire. She painted the cliffs and the sea and a figure standing on the edge of the world, not falling, not jumping, just standing. Her hands moved like they were remembering something her heart had forgotten, how to make beauty out of pain. She stayed. Up until sunrise, her brush never still, her chest finally loosening with every stroke. The rest of the trip felt different. Not lighter, not easier, but realer, truer, like she wasn't pretending anymore. She laughed harder, she danced longer. She said yes to things she used to fear, cliff diving, sea urchin sushi, a slow dance with a stranger under the stars. Not because she was over it, but because she wasn't going to let him be the end of her story. Every sunrise in Santorini reminded her, you are still here. You are still here. On the last night, she and her friends sat on the rooftop, the island, spread beneath them like a poem. They passed a bottle of wine around, and each of them said what they wanted to leave behind and what they wanted to take with them. When it was her turn, Emily looked at the stars and said, I'm leaving silence behind, and I'm taking myself back. There were tears, of course, but they were the kind that made you clean, not broken. Back home, things didn't magically fix themselves. Her job was still stressful. Her apartment still smelled like the candle Jacob used to love. But something in her had shifted. She didn't flinch at the sound of a message notification anymore. She took the ring out of the drawer one last time, and instead of crying, she walked to the edge of the pier by the river and dropped it into the water. It sank fast, and she smiled. Some promises belonged at the bottom of something deep. She started painting full-time, opened a tiny gallery space downtown with her cousin's help. Her first exhibit was called Vanishing Points, and it sold out by the second night. People said there was something raw and alive in her work, like heartbreak with teeth, like hope stitched together with thorns. One woman cried in front of a canvas called Red Dress, no words. Emily didn't have to tell her what it meant. Months passed. Then almost a year. She didn't date much, not out of fear, but because she was finally learning how to live for herself. And then, on a chilly October night at a local gallery crawl, she met someone. His name was Theo. He didn't reach for her like she was a lifeline or a prize, just smiled and said, "This one moved me," pointing at her painting of a woman standing on a rooftop, alone and radiant. He didn't know her story. She didn't offer it. But he listened when she spoke, really listened, like each word was a string in a song only she could sing. They had coffee, then dinner, then hours of walking through the city talking about books, loss, and the taste of salt air. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't rush her. He just stayed. Quietly. Kindly. Constantly. And one night, as they lay watching the ceiling shadows dance above her bed, He asked if she ever wanted to paint him. She laughed. "Not yet," she said. "But maybe someday. Because love didn't have to be fireworks and destruction. Sometimes it was slow, gentle, a steady hand after the storm." And that's the end of part 3-4. The last chapter is next. And it's the one where healing becomes power. Like if you've ever been through hell and come back shining, and tell me in the comments where you're finding your strength from. We're almost there. The woman she had been when she bought her wedding dress was gone. Not buried, not lost. Just transformed, reshaped by the fire and forged into someone new, someone sharper and softer at once. Emily Hart was no longer the girl waiting at the altar for a man who ran from her. She had become the woman who didn't just survive the absence, she grew inside it, filled it with art, breath, and her own voice. Like and subscribe if you've ever found your voice in silence, and write a comment with the country you're healing in. You're not alone in this story. A year passed, then another. Theo stayed, not in the way Jacob once promised, but in the way a sunrise always shows up, even after the blackest night. He never asked about Jacob, never pressed her to explain the shadows in her silence. But one day, as they walked by the river, the place where she had dropped the ring, she told him. She told him everything. The bookstore, the ring in the apartment, the wedding that never was, the disappearance, the silence, the honeymoon that shattered her. And when she finished, her hands were trembling, her voice hoarse, but her heart steady. Theo didn't speak. Right away. He just reached for her hand, lifted it to his chest, and said, "You made it through. And look who you are." Not poor you, not how awful, just that simple truth. Look who you are. And she smiled. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because she no longer needed it not to. Later that week, she got a message from a name she hadn't seen in years. Jacob. It sat unread for 2 days. She stared at the notification like it was a ghost scratching at her door, but she didn't open it. Not because she was afraid of what it said, but because it didn't matter anymore. Eventually, curiosity won. It was short, no apology, just a hollow line. "I saw your exhibit. You've changed. You look strong." No mention of leaving her. No explanation of the lies. Just those few words. And she realized he still didn't understand what he had done. He still thought she was the one he left behind. She didn't reply. She deleted the message and blocked the number, and as she did, she whispered, "You don't get to watch me rise." He had already stolen too much. He didn't get to witness her joy like it belonged to him. Closure, she'd learned, isn't always about getting answers. Sometimes it's about choosing not to need them. A few months later, she opened a second gallery. It was called the Red Room, filled with pieces about loss and rebirth, betrayal, and the quiet power of becoming. The opening night was a flood of strangers and laughter, and somewhere in the crowd, Theo stood, holding a glass of wine and beaming like she had painted the stars just for him. She didn't feel broken anymore. One of the final paintings she hung was a self-portrait. Not literal, just the back of a woman walking down a stone path under a Greek sun, her red dress catching the wind. The plaque beside it read only, "She saw him," and kept walking. People stood for a long time in front of that one. Some wiped their eyes. Some held their partners tighter. Emily didn't need to explain the piece to anyone, because it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who's ever been left, lied to, ghosted, and still got up the next morning with trembling hands and chose to keep going. She had become a story of what happens after the heartbreak, when the fairy tale ends and the real magic begins. Years down the line, she married Theo. Not in a cathedral or on a mountaintop, just a garden with lilacs and sun and the vows, written with paintbrushes instead of pens. She didn't wear white, she wore gold. Because gold is what's left after the fire burns through everything false. She still kept a canvas in her studio labeled, "For What Almost Was." She added to it now and then, not out of pain, but out of gratitude. Because if Jacob hadn't ghosted her, if he hadn't vanished and shattered everything, she never would have met herself. and that, above all else, was the love story she'd been waiting to live. The one where the hero wasn't the man who stayed. It was the woman who refused to stay broken. The end. If this story reached your heart, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what country you're standing tall in now, because no matter where you are, your story matters. Always.
When we moved into the old house on Wren Hollow Lane, it felt like a fresh start. The paint was peeling, the pipes groaned when the water ran, and the hardwood floors had a certain uneven creak that made it impossible to sneak around at night. But I didn't mind. Not really. After the divorce and the chaos that followed, I was desperate for something solid, something still. I wanted silence. My daughter, Ellie, needed it too. She was only 6 when we moved in. A sensitive child, quiet and observant, with large dark eyes and a laugh like bells in winter. She didn't talk much during the move. She just held tightly to her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Lumps, and stared out the window of the moving van like she was already somewhere else. I should have known then. The house had a strange shape to it, with narrow hallways that curved in odd places and doors that led to rooms with no apparent purpose. One of those rooms was upstairs, tucked behind a slanted corridor. A small door, no taller than 4 feet, led to it. I thought it might have been a nursery once. There were faded patterns of moons and stars on the walls, long covered over with layers of dusty cream paint. Ellie discovered it on the second day. "This is mine," she said. Her voice was calm, but her fingers were clenched tightly around the door frame. I laughed and told her it could be her playroom if she wanted. "I don't want it." "They do," she said. I asked her who they were, and she smiled, but didn't answer. I assumed she meant imaginary friends. It wasn't uncommon, especially for only children. I figured it was her way of coping. The therapist had warned me she might retreat into herself, create her own world to feel safe. That night, I peeked in on her as she slept. Mr. Lumps was tucked under one arm, and her other hand rested on a worn, spiral-bound notebook she always kept with her. I didn't think much of it at the time. The first strange thing happened the following week. I was in the kitchen sorting through boxes when I heard soft giggles echoing through the baby monitor. I'd set it up in Ellie's room as a precaution. She still had nightmares sometimes, and I liked to listen in from the kitchen, but this laughter wasn't hers. It was too deep, too old. I froze. The laughter continued, layered with whispering, low and quick like leaves brushing each other in a dead wind. I rushed upstairs and threw open her door. Ellie was sitting on the floor in the dark, the only light coming from her tiny flashlight as she wrote in her notebook. She looked up and smiled. "They're funny," she said. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who, Ellie?" "The inside ones. They talk different when it's dark." Her words sent a chill through me, but I said nothing. I just tucked her in and took the notebook when she fell asleep. I know, I shouldn't have invaded her privacy like that, but something felt wrong. The cover was scuffed and covered with little symbols drawn in black crayon, circles within circles, dots like eyes, lines that twisted into shapes I didn't recognize. Inside, the handwriting was childish, looping letters and occasional backwards words. Most of it was nonsense, until I found a page labeled "The Whisper Room." It read, "You're not supposed to tell, but I'll write it anyway. The whisper room is where they come in, not through the door, under the wall where the cold part is. Mr. Lumps saw them first, but he can't talk anymore. They're nice to me because I don't scream. I said the song like they said. Now I can see them better. I read it twice, 3 times. I didn't sleep that night.